Hey there athletes, Coach John Ferry here from Team Wilpers. Excited as always to welcome you to our Week 6 athlete briefing for the Summer Run Challenge. So just as always, let's do a little Week 5 review. So Week 5 here, we are back in action coming off of our Week 4 download. So hopefully everybody was fresh and ready to hit these workouts hard. Started the week with our threshold run. The base of that run there is 3 by 5 minutes plus 4 minutes at threshold for a total time of 19 minutes at threshold, coming into a real sweet spot in those workouts. Key run number 2, our VO2 Max run. 4 by 3 minutes this week at VO2 Max is our base. A really strong effort here, hitting that first VO2 Max workout back and finishing the week as always with our endurance run where we want light and smooth effort throughout. So those are our 3 key Week 5 workouts here. Just as a reminder, as always, keep going into that portal, checking the box, getting the credit for doing the workout. Still want to be chasing that 100% completion percentage or getting as close as possible. That's how we get results. Now, jumping ahead to our Week 6 workouts, excuse me. Another threshold run. I don't know if it's starting to feel like Groundhog Day out there, but we're repeating the structure week by week by week. So in previous challenges, different half marathon challenges, etc., we've really changed around the dynamic type of workout. Some are tempo, some are threshold, some are etc. In this structure, we're really repeating the threshold VO2 Max workouts and just building upon the progress week by week by week. So this is going to be another step up this week, looking at a base of 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 6, so a total of 24 minutes of total time at threshold. So this is coming into the really, a real kind of quintessential threshold moment where we're over 20 minutes now, really operating at a nice strong level in this threshold zone here. So the principles remain from the last time we discussed threshold here, which is you don't want to start these intervals too fast. It's going to make you kind of pay down the line. So we don't want it to become a VO2 Max workout. We want this thing to be a threshold workout, so an endurance race pace. So it's okay to come into it a little bit light if you're having a hard time finding pace, but make sure not to overshoot these paces, especially early. And we got to maximize that recovery time. It's not a lot. That's kind of the nature of threshold workouts. Long periods of work, short periods of recovery, but you want to maximize that time, try to get your breath back, settle down so that you can get right back into it and continue to kind of operate at that same level there. So, pacing, super important, making sure to be thoughtful early, not to go too hard, too fast, too quick, and then really dial it back down, really try to maximize that recovery time. For this workout in particular, and kind of especially the base way that I wrote it, this would be one to really add on a bit of an extended cool down. You are operating at a very high level, that kind of zone 4 at 24 minutes of total time. So you're pushing, you're really working hard. It's a relatively short cool down in here. So if you have time, add a few extra minutes so you can really wind your body down slowly, finishing it up with some nice stretching, hopefully. Run number 2, our VO2 Max run, 3 by 4 minute with 3 minute rest. So we're going a little bit further into the total amount of time, into the length of the interval here for VO2 Max, but we are giving it a nice, very generous kind of recovery time in comparison to the work ratio. So tough long intervals, generous rest, don't be afraid of pushing hard, and then also don't be afraid of pulling way back on the recovery because you need to. So this is a workout, and we're going to have another one next week that's going to be really designed to, super specific prep for that 20-minute distance test. You're pushing quite hard. You're holding this pace for an extended period of time. You're really having to dig in. So this is a pace that's going to be fairly similar for a lot of people to that pace that you might run for a 20-minute distance test. Maybe a little bit faster, maybe right there in alignment. Either way, what you're doing is practicing putting yourself into an uncomfortable position, continuing to push and push hard. And then we're taking a big recovery. That full 3 minutes. 3 minutes is enough time for basically all of us to come all the way back down to an easy heart rate, even maintaining a light jog, and then hit it again. So in a workout like this, where we only have 3 intervals in the entire workout that we're really focusing on, for a total amount of time of 12 minutes of actual high intensity work, it's super, super important to really go after each of them individually. I know I've talked about this style of working out in the past. You don't get the benefit unless you go all the way. Kind of on the flip side, threshold, if you need to scale it back a few seconds, if you need to back off, especially if you're running outside and it's hot, pulling 10, 20 seconds off and able to extend the workout, that's probably a pretty good deal in threshold. You might end up kind of high zone 3 instead of low zone 4. And VO2 max, you have to take it all the way. If you end up kind of mid zone 4 or high zone 4, you're not getting the benefit of VO2 max. You're not really getting the benefit of threshold either. So it's important. Take the rest, really go after it in the main set, take the recovery, repeat 2 more times. That'll be our VO2 max workout. And then finally, as always, run number 3, our endurance run, hopefully the most fun run of the week. I know there are a lot of athletes additionally that are out there that are planning already for fall events, for longer events. It is okay to add distance, to add time to this workout, but you still want to be walking away from it knowing that you had more to give. So just remember for these workouts, especially as we, at least here on the East Coast, have been dealing with a heat wave this week, but I know it's summertime across the country, obviously, is that you want to dial the pace back to make the distance feel easy. So even as runs become double-digit miles, 15 miles, 20 miles for the marathoners out there, you still need to walk away from those efforts knowing that you had more to give. So continue to adjust the effort back and do it, whether it's 45 minutes or 4 hours, you want to adjust that effort back to make the distance feel easy. So let's jump into some questions that came up via the group. So first question here. I have a question regarding heart rate while training on easy days. When I am doing endurance runs or long easy runs, my heart rate inevitably creeps up into zone 4, hovering in the 160 to 163 range, so not an easy aerobic workout. My resting heart rate is 52 beats a minute. I've read that this indicates I am aerobically challenged, thus my easy runs are not truly easy, even though I'm holding my easy pace and my breathing is not ragged. Should I be slowing down to keep my heart rate down, doing run-walk intervals on my longer, easy endurance runs, or just keep doing it the way I am, even though my heart rate is elevated? So, great question, and there's actually a lot to unpack in here. So, the first thing I always mention, and if you've been around here a while, you've heard me talk about it before, especially with heart rate training, is where did these heart rate zones come from? Have you done a lab test? If you haven't done a lab test, have you done your own field test to try to determine max heart rate, threshold heart rate, and then use some percentages to kind of give a good gauge of where those heart rate zones might be? If so, excellent. On the flip side, if you're pulling these zones from the stock kind of thing that comes on your wearable device, workout equipment that you're using, I wouldn't put much stock in it because it's kind of a generic thing slapped across all of us. And if I've learned anything in my years of working with people, is that one thing very rarely applies to the other, in particular when it comes to heart rate and things of that nature. So if you haven't taken the time to really figure out and find your heart rate zones, I wouldn't look at it at all because it's not very useful information. That being said, it's not that hard to administer, especially a max heart rate field test. It's not that hard and it's not that difficult. Threshold field test, a little bit different scenario. It's a very Googleable thing to do. And so if you are big into heart rate and really want to train by heart rate, it's absolutely worth the time. It would take a single workout to do a max heart rate field test. And that's going to give you a much better guideline of where you want to be working heart rate wise. So if you have done that, if you do know your heart rate and you feel really comfortable with your heart rate zones and you're still having a hard time with zone 2, know that you are in very good company. It is quite difficult for 99% of runners to really run and stay in like a true zone 2 the whole time. It takes a ton of practice and eventually you can get there, but there's a lot that goes with it. So heart rate, especially zone 2 efficiency, is a very long and slow process. So if you are an athlete and your main goal targets are ultra endurance in terms of ultra running, Ironman type style of things, training cycles that might take an entire calendar year for a goal that you're working towards, it might make sense to do a very intensive zone 2 training block. When we're starting to work with heart rate, and especially a zone 2 training block, to really find that efficiency, you would probably want to designate about 6 months of your training schedule for that event to starting with zone 2 and doing nothing but zone 2 work until you get more efficient and develop that efficiency and develop that efficiency. And so yes, it would for most people would require going back to either a combination of run walk or simply walk, using heart rate as your guiding principle only. So one, also this wearable device on my wrist, I know for sure it's not that accurate. Wrist-based heart rate is good, it's decent, but it's not great. So if you want to go to that level and do really focused heart rate work, you're going to have to switch to a chest strap. There's some really good arm straps out there now, but if I were going to go to that level, it would definitely be a chest strap style heart rate monitor that I would want to be using to get the most accurate results. So that's pretty extreme. The amount of athletes I use it with is basically 0. And the reason I don't use it with that many athletes is that for the largest part of the population, we'd be a lot better off by working across multiple spectrums of energy zones, developing efficiency, getting stronger as runners, and really using a little bit of pace, but mostly effort to guide that easy pace zone. Because we don't have to necessarily be a true zone 2 all the time. I know it's a very popular buzzword now, and there's plenty of great reason to really focus on it and try to maintain that nice, easy effort. But zone 2 is an endurance zone. Zone 3 is an endurance zone. Zone 4 is not, we're starting to get threshold and beyond at that point. So if you're, legitimately drifting into zone 4 during especially half marathon long runs, that is something we certainly would want to work with and dial back down. But most importantly is make sure those zones are super accurate and go after it that way. And then, so to answer your question, for the most part, I wouldn't be too worried about it. I do think it probably makes sense if you're really interested to do a max heart rate field test. Next question here was, I utilize endurance runs to really concentrate on my form and stride. How do I know if my strides are appropriately short? Is there a range of steps per minute I should be shooting for, and is there an app for that? So we'll start with the cadence part here. So the gold standard for steps per minute is about 180, which doesn't mean that that is the only amount of steps per minute that all of us should be running, because once again, we're all different. So that being said, it will fluctuate a little bit. When you go into your easiest runs, it's very likely that your cadence is going to drop a little bit. And when you go into your, let's say our VO2 Max work, our threshold work, it's very likely that it's going to just come up a little bit, and you're going to have a little bit faster turnover there. And that is okay. So while there is a standard, it is not what we have to be running all the time. So most wearables, Garmin, Apple Watch, pretty much the rest of them, will give you cadence. It tends to be after the fact. So after the workout, you go and look at what those steps per minute are. FootPod sometimes, I've been using Zwift running, just kind of an experiment lately indoors to kind of change things up. It actually gives real-time feedback on what cadence is, which is fairly interesting. I'm sure there's some other things that do it out there. But intra-workout, what I would actually do if you want to be focused on cadence is probably do something more audibly based, because the last thing I want anyone to be doing is looking a lot at their watch, their phone, etc., while they're especially out on the road, where hopefully you're paying attention to one, to your run, and then two, to your surroundings. So audible cues, there are two ways you could go about it. One, you could do a metronome. It's very effective, very boring, and wouldn't be my first option. So two, for the more musically inclined people out there are a lot of playlists that are designed to be 170 beats per minute, 180 beats per minute, etc. So if you can kind of hear that and feel that rhythm there, it's going to be a lot more interesting, engaging way to try to match your footfalls to those strides. If you're not very musically inclined, back to the metronome. It does work, just a little bit slow. Where I would start with that, is I would take a look at your data coming from your wearable. And if you have, let's say, a current cadence of 165 beats per minute, just because I said 180 beats per minute is the standard, don't try to go from 165 to 180. you're altering your stride. And what we know about altering stride is that in the short term, you're guaranteed to lose efficiency. So it's going to take an adjustment period. So if I were going to go to the effort, once again, to adjust my stride, I'd want to do it in very incremental bits. So if we're at 165, I'd be looking at 170. And I wouldn't hold that for a session and then move to the next session. I wouldn't hold it for a week and then move to the next. I would be looking at a month to 2 months, trying to really get comfortable in that 5-beat movement. After that month to 2 months, when I started to notice that I was doing it without thinking about it, at that time it would be worth taking maybe 5 more beats. And once again, another month, 2 months until I start to feel comfortable doing it without thinking about it. But it's a slow process. You always want to be incredibly careful when altering your mechanics and your stride. And then the final question in terms of stride length, there are some foot pods, there are some devices that do some kind of calculation. I think it sure feels a lot more like a rough guess than anything else. You certainly don't need a short stride length. So if you have a long stride length, and that's great. Actually going faster is long stride length, more cadence. So no need to focus on short stride length. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't focus on stride length at all. I would focus on cadence, if anything, let the stride length take care of itself. I think a non-mentioned comment here, oh no, because if you are 5'3", shorter legs, that stride length is going to be a little bit less. You're going to be a little bit more dependent upon a high turnover anyway, so no need to worry there. Our next question here is, I'm doing a trail run at the end of the summer, but I don't live near hills or said trail. Any recommendations on how to train for trail runs on a treadmill? What's an incline percent start? And so this is going to apply to a lot of athletes, even if you're not trail running. This example is obviously going to be trail related. But if you are in a place, let's say for our flatlanders out there that are training for, let's say, the New York City Marathon, which is certainly not a mountain, but a notably hilly marathon race course. So you live in an area, you do not have access to the conditions that you're racing in. That's kind of what we're talking about here. And so you always, and in particular in a trail race, you want to be looking at that course profile. That's going to tell you everything about what you need to do for training here. So step one, find the course profile, preferably the GPX file, so you can really get in some software and break down the course and figure out what it looks like. You want to do some deep study on this thing. So what you want to know is how long are the climbs? At what incline? So how steep are these climbs? And then what is the general terrain? Are you on carriage road? Is it an ultra technical trail? Because these are all things you're going to need to know when planning your training here. So plan your training to match the demands of that topographical area. So we'll use an example here. So I have an athlete that is training in 6 weeks who's doing the Leadville 100, but he lives in the state of Indiana. So he lives in a spot where he not only is it difficult to find hills, he's definitely not finding a mountain, especially one that's 10,000 feet at the starting line. So we've had to do a lot of work to try to do as best as we possibly can. So absolutely, we're using treadmills to mimic hills. We're sending him out in the heat of the day to mimic the heat when he gets on top of those mountaintops. We're having him do VO2 Max work to try to mimic the lack of oxygen that he'll feel when he's pushing 10, 12,000 feet in the air. Those are all things we know, but that course also, it probably is 60%, if not 70% hiking with 30 to 40 miles of running mixed in. So incredibly important thing in that race is being able to hike at incredibly fast and incredibly efficient speed. So we're doing treadmill sessions where he's hiking at 15% for a long period of time. So that's an important thing for that race. If you're doing, I ran an ultra earlier in the spring. That was out on trail. Thankfully, it was mostly carriage road for me. There were huge inclines. So I was doing a lot of mileage. I was doing a lot of sustained multi-mile hill runs because that was the demand of that particular race course. So it's crucial. Get into the GPX file, get into the course profile, and then match the training you're doing to the demands of that race in particular. And in trail, it can vary so widely, you have to start there and work backwards. And then the final thing for all runners and trail runners more than anybody is strength work. If you're doing especially a lot of ascending and descending, you got to really focus on strengthening quads, hamstrings, glutes, etc. They're going to take a ton of punishment. Calves on the long sustained uphills for sure. So strengthening your whole self as an athlete. And then once again for trail, is important to all of us, but trail more so is feet and ankles. You want to be doing extra feet and ankle work from now all the way until your race to try to really prepare for the demands of that trail. Hopefully that helped. All right, next question here was, for interval runs, do you suggest doing them outside or on the treadmill? My 20-minute test was outside, and I'm trying to keep all of my runs outside, but don't know if you had any suggestions on that. So my initial suggestion is that I always like runs to be outside, period. So it requires you to learn how to pace much better than indoors. It requires you to learn to adjust to terrain. It requires you to understand how to adjust your difficulty or your pacing in different environmental conditions and still be able to continue, etc. So that doesn't mean that I don't like treadmills. It doesn't mean that I don't use treadmills personally. It just means that if you are planning to run races outdoors, there are more benefits to running outdoors than indoors. The treadmill is a great option for if there are safety concerns. People are having to work out, first thing in the morning while it's still dark outside, for, inclement weather, snow and ice when footing is bad. Rain is not necessarily inclement weather, everybody. You can run in the rain just fine, I promise you. And I've run multiple races already this year in the rain, and it helps to train and understand how to adjust your gear. So don't feel like a little bit of rain forces you to stay inside. But yes, you could certainly, use treadmill on a day that's raining. Give yourself a little bit of a break. But you're going to get more benefit, especially if you're planning to race outside. Run those interval workouts outside. There's more bang for your buck for sure. Well, that's all for today, friends. Thanks so much as always for tuning in, and I can't wait to see you back here next week. Have an amazing week 6.